there's a big part of this is saying, hey, let me look at that guy. What's that guy doing? He's a guy wearing a squirrel suit, right? Wandering down the street. and people do that. And that's not a threat itself. And we try to train people to be able to pick out what might be a threat, dismiss what's not a threat, and focus on what is a threat.
Welcome to another episode of Applied Science Live, the podcast oriented toward showcasing important work across the spectrum of science and society. This is your host, Alex Garinther. Hope you all are staying safe. This episode is being released in early April 2020, and it would seem out of touch if I didn't mention that over the past few weeks, the world as we know it has drastically changed. People are adapting to the coronavirus pandemic, and despite the jolly soundbite that opened us up and the goofy intro music that I use, today's topic is on a serious matter: safety and security. We talk military and police training, topics in criminology, forensic psychology. It's a behind-the-scenes look at someone who works in these areas and the path they've taken building a program of research and applying that research to improve public safety. Dr. Nathan Meehan, our guest today, or Nate as I call him because he's a friend of mine, is also a social scientist with decades of experience in threat detection, crime prevention, and crime analysis. We're going to talk a little bit about the ways he and his team harness an understanding of psychology, of nonverbal behavior, things like physics and anatomy, and how all of these insights come together to better equip law enforcement professionals. There's some really interesting ways that we can see these insights reflected in the trainings that law enforcement professionals receive. Much of what we're talking about here is visual search and observation, ways that a trained observer can assess an environment and filter their attentional spotlight to hone in on the right targets, to pick out based on outward behavior, not based on stereotypes or traits of a person, the cues and clues that can reliably lead to further investigation or a worthwhile interdiction. Safety, as we know, is one of those fundamental needs, one of those things that is such a key pillar that if it cracks, much else crumbles around it. And right now, we are unfortunately seeing some of those cracks play out as a virus spreads across the globe and disrupts our daily lives. And while the current episode might not seem directly related to the viral outbreak, I think there are lots of not so obvious connections to be made. Like medical professionals and so many others on the front lines, law enforcement face unique, specific challenges and have been put into a crucial role today and every day. And if you click over to SecondSite.com, the topic of one recent blog post from Nate has to do with how police departments are managing and adapting as this COVID pandemic unfolds. But for now, and without further ado, I'm going to throw it over to our conversation on threat detection and the process by which evidence-based training tactics are derived, understood, monitored, communicated, and enacted in practice. I hope you enjoy.
I like to describe myself as a criminologist and an applied researcher. I've got a PhD in criminal justice from the University of Albany. I also, while I was getting my PhD, I set up and ran a crime analysis unit in upstate New York, in a city of about 60,000 people with a pretty serious crime problem. While I was working as an analyst, I helped catch burglars, helped catch robbers, worked on an FBI Operation Safe Street task force targeting a violent gang that was involved in some pretty serious stuff. After I finished my PhD, I went from there to do some work, to do research for the Department of Defense at the U.S. Naval Research Lab, and that's where we worked together at the NRL. At the Naval Research Lab was kind of an interesting monster because I was a federal employee, but I was a internal research contractor. So we did projects for Department of Justice, we did projects for Department of Homeland Security, did work for Department of Defense itself. And, you know, the projects range from interviewing and interrogation techniques to building research platforms for Department of Homeland Security, to, you know, some of the stuff that we'll talk about in a little bit with kind of observation and what we call active threat assessment, and training and working with military and law enforcement and security people on how to look for things. Those projects dried up around 2016. And at that time, I had the opportunity to go private, and that's when we started SecondSite. And, you know, the idea behind SecondSite was to take, you know, all the research that we'd done, that we were allowed to, all the research that we had done, and make it available to law enforcement and security people throughout the U.S. because the stuff that we developed is important and useful information that can help keep these folks safe. And also help them do a better job. And we can talk a little bit more about how all that stuff comes together. You know? And so we build our own exercises, and, you know, we take all of our stuff and move it online. And that's been an interesting experience myself, learning how all that stuff works.
Sure. And what kind of material is being communicated through these online platforms?
Yeah, so let me step back and kind of describe a little bit for your listeners about the JDLR, the Just Doesn't Look Right project that I ran for the Department of Defense, and I'll try to walk that story through so that, you know, the folks listening can kind of see how all this stuff came together. Back when I started at the Naval Research Lab, you know, we had soldiers deployed all over the world to urban environments. They were being targeted by improvised explosive devices. They were being ambushed. They were being attacked. And we were asked to see if it was possible to transfer observation skills from more experienced, and I use the term veterans in air quotes, because veterans is not just imply military, it implies, you know, experienced police officers, experienced law enforcement, experienced security people, executive protection, those kinds of things. And so can we transfer some of these situational awareness and observation techniques that experienced people build up over time about how to spot what potential threats are? People who get experienced at dealing with people who are fighting or carrying weapons, or I'm not covering lie detection because lie detection is a whole nother mess, and we ain't talking about lie detection. But, you know, people who deal with folks that may attack, may run, may fight, may be carrying a weapon, over time, you build up a perspective on what that looks like. And sometimes people recognize it, and sometimes this experienced person may not even realize they're doing it. And, you know, they'll make decisions because they saw things that imply somebody's got a weapon tucked under their belt, and they might attack them, and they may not necessarily know they're doing it. And there's thought processes and things that they look for. So the idea behind the JDLR project was to see if we could articulate how those experienced people looked for those threats enough to be able to transfer that to that 19 or 20-year-old young person, you know, young infantryman or young Marine being deployed to an urban environment without that experience, you know, because we're talking about, you know, folks that have 10, 15, 20 years of experience as a beat cop, let's say, or, you know, as doing executive protection, you know, like the Secret Service, you know, guarding dignitaries and stuff like that. That's a lot. People build up experience over time. And we wanted to see if it was possible to transfer that systematically to others. And that starts with, well, what do they do and what do they look for, right? And this is where it comes down to a basic research question, right? it wasn't a question of, all right, what can we give these soldiers right off the bat? It was a question of, well, what is actually happening here? What do experienced people look for? And when I got handed the project, I took it at a slightly different approach. I just left being running that crime analysis unit in Schenectady, and a number of the folks that I still knew were up there working on this FBI task force. And I went and talked to them about it. And I said, hey, look, I got asked by the DOD to do this thing. And I talked to these guys. These were tactical trainers, cops who train other cops to deal with dangerous situations. And we talked about it. And there's a whole lexicon and approach and vocabulary and thought process behind how experienced cops are looking for things. And we initially started off with, how are they looking for people carrying concealed weapons? Because that's an easy, discrete behavior to look at, right? Is somebody carrying a concealed weapon, illegal or not? And we focused on that. And then we expanded it out from there to, well, how are police officers doing drug interdiction, for example? What are they looking for? And then also, couriers carrying drugs and money through airports. And some of these things are a mix of, I don't know how to call them physics, right? They're like how the body moves. If you're carrying something that weighs 2 pounds and you tuck it under your belt that's dangerous, you're going to walk in a certain way. Some of these other behaviors are, I don't want to get caught if somebody might be looking for me. If I got a big bag of methamphetamines tucked into my pants and I'm walking by a cop, I might be nervous. And then some of these behaviors are things that people might do if they're trying to not be noticed, or they're trying to set themselves up to victimize somebody else or target somebody else. And so what we did is we tried to identify those behaviors and say, hey, what do people actually look for? And then the next thing we did is we said, well, how are these behaviors, how do they roll into a decision-making process, right? Because it's not just one thing that tells you that somebody is behaving in a certain way that's a threat, right? So your job is to observe a crowd of people, and you're trying to figure out, and you spot somebody doesn't look right. We'll talk more about that in a second. And you think that person, and it's not one little behavior that shows you that there's something going on with that individual. It's a series of behaviors, that it's a quantity of them. It's how many you see. It's when you see them. It's the combination of things. And so, we spent more time working with experienced law enforcement personnel to kind of see how that added up, and also to see if we could then understand it enough to transfer and apply it to our soldiers going to other places, right? So we had an idea, here's what the behaviors are, right? Here, if the person stands in this way, or he stands in this position, or he walks in this way, we think X or Y is happening. Now, the problem is that, as we all know, different locations have different patterns of movement and patterns of consistent behavior. And different cultures especially have different ways that people interact and things that they carry and what they do. And so what we realized is we can't really take the behaviors that we learned from how cops look for bad guys in Boston and hand those over to a soldier going and doing patrol in Baghdad. Thankfully, we're not there anymore so much, but we can't do that wholesale. And what we realized is we had to step back and said, well, if we don't know where that soldier's going, we don't know enough about the culture that they're going to be in, to tell them what to look for. And because it's pretty complicated, we approached it differently. And we approached it from a perspective of, let's develop an observation methodology that anybody can deploy anywhere they are to figure out that pattern of consistent behaviors and what's happening around me. And, that's that process, that systematic observation process of looking for those, well, I'll say it again. If I say it too many times, I apologize. That pattern of consistent behavior, you can assess that wherever you are. Every place has a pattern of consistent behavior. It's just different. And so if you can assess that pattern of consistent behavior, then you can identify what doesn't look right, what stands out, and you can identify, you can filter down from that 100 people that you're looking at down to that one or two whose behavior is deviating, and they become an object of focus. Say, well, is that guy carrying a gun, or is he just dressed funny? Or is he just waiting for somebody? Or what is he doing? Because a lot of these people that you and I may see that are acting funny, or even our police officers and our security people see that are acting funny, they're not a threat. There's a big part of this is saying, hey, let me look at that guy. What's that guy doing? He's a guy wearing a squirrel suit, right? Wandering down the street. and people do that, and that's not a threat itself. And we try to train people, or we train people in how to dismiss those things that aren't a threat, because there's a lot of things that may be odd, but not a lot of those are actual threats. And we want to prepare people. I don't know if I just jumped too far ahead on some of this stuff, but we want to prepare people, or prepare our law enforcement security people and our military people, to be able to pick out what might be a threat, dismiss what's not a threat, and focus on what is a threat. What they need to be concerned about. And a lot of things, there's a lot of misconceptions about how law enforcement and people are interacting with the public. And we've got issues with unnecessary force. We've got people getting shot, rightly or wrongly. It's a very complex topic. And what we try to do is we try to train people to be able to make more informed decisions about what they see. People as in law enforcement, security people, all that kind of thing, so that they can look at somebody and say, hey, I think they may or may not have a weapon. I think they're doing X or Y, so I need to approach this person in this way. And so after we did this research, we were then asked to put it into practice, probably quicker than I would have wanted. So in any given process of applying research to practice, there's steps that you want to go through until you actually deploy something. And, we had this basic amount of research, and we were asked by the person who was funding us to apply it. And I frankly probably wasn't ready at that point, but we got in touch with some groups through the U.S. Southern Command who support peace operations. And this is the Global Peace Operations Initiative stuff that we've discussed. So U.S. government supports many nations throughout the world. So these host nations can provide their military forces to support peacekeeping missions in places like Haiti, or the Democratic Republic of Congo, or Mali, or the Sinai, or a lot of other places. And through my work at the DoD, we became connected with Southcom and the Uruguayan Peace Operations Training Center, and we developed a pilot training program with them, where we started training all of their platoon commanders, their sergeants, senior sergeants, lieutenants, and captains that were going abroad, going to the Congo to assist on a peacekeeping mission. And the Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, is a dangerous place. There's many people carrying weapons. It's been in a state of civil war and conflict for years. And it's also a very wealthy country in terms of natural resources. So there's a lot of competition for those natural resources. But we took this basic research that we had collected and understood from law enforcement, and how people do things, and how experienced people do things and what they look for. And we put it into practice through this pilot training program with the Uruguayan Army and Peace Operations Training School, and they loved it. And we ended up training 120 to 150. My team, which was experienced law enforcement instructors, ended up training 150 of their platoon commanders. And then we also trained their own instructors, Uruguayan instructors, so that they could pick it up and run with it as what's called the train the trainer. And and everybody really liked it. And then we ran out of money. We got shut down, and that was it. And we did all this great work. Everybody was happy. Everybody loved it. And it got shut down because things happen.
Right.
And that's when we took what we were allowed to take, what was publicly available, and that's when we started SecondSite. And the idea behind SecondSite was, hey, let's take all this work and research and this training program that was developed with American experience, with the experience of law enforcement, and let's make it available to them. And knowing how much everything costs, because it's incredibly expensive to put a person in a seat, especially a person who in an organization that has to provide services like a law enforcement organization does 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's very expensive. So we went online with it. And we spent about a year developing our online training program. And as we've expanded, we wanted to make some classes that were kind of, I don't want to say distilled down from some of those techniques that we could make more available to people, so we can train, folks off the street who just want to learn how to be more aware of their environment. We can train security people who do interdict with organized retail crime, shoplifters, all that kind of stuff. We train church security people.
Train a mall cop.
Yeah, but just think about it this way. Mall cops have to deal with this too. And in some ways, they've got less training and less experience. They're dealing with, especially now with our problem that we're having with active shooters and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's a threatening situation, and you want to give people tools. You want to give that mall cop tools too, so they can be more aware and stay safe for themselves, but also keep everybody around us safe.
And that's pretty cool that they're getting a toolkit that comes from a big DoD funded project and that's been used to train, it sounds like, people deployed all around the world, kind of bringing that to anyone. How many personnel do you think you've trained at this point over everything we've talked about here?
Well, so there's I'd say thousands. I'm not exactly sure. So we've got, all of our online classes. We've got the instructor-led stuff that we've done. We've trained entire police departments. Probably, I'd definitely say, and we're still, we have good relationships with a couple of police academies. And so we train as a public service. We train every single police recruit at the Zone 5 Law Enforcement Academy in upstate New York, because it's where a lot of our folks are from. It's where I'm from originally. And so we do that gratis. So every police recruit who goes through the Zone 5 Academy gets trained in our techniques. So that's, it's a couple hundred there a year alone. So a lot, I guess, at this point. And it's not that many if you think about it. There's hundreds of thousands of police officers out there. There's even more security people out there. We have 500,000 or 600,000 military people in our own armed forces. So that's a drop in the bucket, right? That's a drop in the bucket.
Right. And how would you say the training you offer compares to some of the trainings that other police academies or other law enforcement organizations use typically around the country?
So, that's really hard because every organization has its own training program and curricula, and they focus on different things. And frankly, they're required by the state to focus on different things. Most organizations are able to provide their trainees on things like defensive tactics, street survival, how to spot somebody in front of you who might be attacking you or carry a concealed weapon, how to defend yourself. What I have not seen, and this is something that almost all of our trainees tell us, it's the observation process ahead of time. So a lot of training that a lot of folks get is somebody's in front of me. How do I know who I'm focusing on? How do I figure out what that person's doing? Are they carrying a weapon? Are they going to attack? They're going to run? That kind of stuff. And a lot of training will focus on, I've got this person in front of me. Like, so a good example is, had the opportunity to do some work with the North Carolina State Highway Patrol, and they're surviving the first 3 seconds program. And some of our original work is incorporated into that program. And while I was at the Naval Research Lab, we had a great relationship with them. They trained their troopers to deal with that person that they pulled over, because that's their job typically, is that they're dealing with that person in the car. So they're not trying to filter out 100 people, who's my bad guy amongst these 100 people I'm watching. They know who they're focusing on, right? And that's a lot of the training that you see. And this is important training, don't get me wrong. If you're dealing with somebody, you need to know what they're going to do, because that's how you keep yourself and that person safe. Because the last thing you want to do is have a police officer who misreads the situation and does something and somebody gets hurt, and nobody wants that. And so, that kind of training is incredibly important. But what we also offer is the step back, where we train that observer to watch a group of people and pick out who should I actually be concerned about? Who do I filter out, and then pick and dismiss and identify and dismiss and say, all right, I need to be worried about this person. I'm going to focus on him. I watch them. They're doing X, Y, Z. I think they might have a handgun. It's my job to go deal with this person. Let me figure out a safe approach. Let me stop and interdict. And that's what we train across that spectrum. And so what we train is, it's that systematic observation technique that's different than most. There's a whole process that we train people on to observe systematically. And that's where our stuff differs, because we formalize this observation process. And we're lucky to work with a lot of smart people, and we put a lot of work into formalizing the step-by-step process. And I'm sure you've probably seen with your own educational background, we talk about, like the research from TSA screeners being evaluated for their ability to pick out something on an X-ray screen. It's visual search research. Is that, the folks who apply the same approach systematically in the same way every time are more likely to notice the thing that they should be noticing. And that's the way this applies.
And I understand that now you offer a version of this training that is for the everyday person, a sort of training version light.
Yeah, so I like that. It's a threat awareness light. Yeah. So what we realize is that, our courses for law enforcement and security people are fairly heavy. We focus on looking for bad guys. We focus on trying to figure out if somebody's carrying a weapon, and what to do about it, decisions to interdict, and all those kinds of things. But there are components of that training that everyday people can use to be more aware of what's happening around them and to stay safe. And so what we did is we distilled these longer observation methodologies into a short, what we call situational awareness training. It's basically, how do I observe what's happening around me so that I can say, well, that doesn't look right. I'm going to avoid that situation, right? And the fact of the matter is that all of us, I'm holding up my phone, right? Spend our time with our noses in our phone. We're always paying attention to something else. And we get put into situations, or we get into situations because we're not paying attention that we shouldn't have been in. And, we could become a victim of a crime. We could put ourselves or our family in a situation where something's going on around us that, if we were more aware, we could have taken steps to avoid it. And so what we did is we distilled our longer, complex observation methodology into a series of 6 or 7 simple steps. And in this 1-hour situational awareness for safety class, we just train people to observe and be more aware of what's happening around them, and identify, this is something that I should avoid. Because that's really, like, for everyday folks, you're not going to be running in, I think that person has a weapon, I'm going to go do something. No, you're just going to get away. You're going to leave. You're going to go somewhere safe, and get away from it. And so we train, this is so that we just launched this class maybe 3 weeks ago. So it's a new offering for us. And so it's a 1-hour class, and basically there's a decent amount of reading and watching videos and stuff like that, but it's a lot of practice, and we have a lot of practice exercise where folks are watching and answering questions and figuring out what they're looking at. And we train people just to be more aware, spot things that might not be the best situation to walk into, and to go the other direction, because that's really what it is. So, the focus of this situational awareness for safety class is, imagine, social workers that are going and visiting their clients, or employees in a clothing store that might be trying to be aware of what's happening around you, because there are thieves around. You're not spotting the bad guy, but at least you can say, hey, there's somebody doing something they shouldn't be doing. It could be all kinds of folks. Could be, ushers at a church, or just everyday folks that are in places where there's other people. To learn more about that class, we actually have a section called personal safety. and there's some basic information about the class, and then you can kind of dig into it, read about what it involves. And the class is fairly inexpensive. It's $25. The class is about an hour long, a lot of practice, and so there's a lot of information there if people want to go in and dig in.
Very cool.
So what I'd like to do to all of your listeners, Alex, is I'd like to offer a $5 discount on that class. We'll set up a coupon code for Applied Science Live that'll be set up until July 30th. All you need to do is use coupon code Applied Science Live, and you'll be able to save a little bit of money on that if you're interested in learning more. I'm happy to be on this show. I think it's been fun talking about it. This is a really important topic because people get concerned about the actions of police, interactions with minority communities, the use of force. It's a very complex topic. It's a ton of gray. Nothing is ever really black and white, and it's an important issue to think about and understand that there's a lot of factors that go into this, and training people to be more aware is a good first step to making good decisions. And that comes to all of us, or the folks that are in charge of protecting us.
Thanks for tuning in. Check out the links below and scroll through our website for more information.